now call this meeting to order at 6:00. Board Clerk, will you call the roll, please?
Yes, I will begin with Director Poole. Director Orzali.
Oh, no, oh, no, okay, we're being recorded, no jokes.
Director Orzali, can you hear us okay?
Yes.
All right, there you are. Director Wood.
Here.
Present.
Jones.
Here.
White.
Aye.
Clark. Director Wood, okay. So turning it back over to you.
Thank you. Now we will do the pledge to the flag. I
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
To the Metro Cable announcement. The open session meeting is videotaped for cable cast on Metro Cable 14. Replay on Saturday, August 13th at 1 p.m. and Monday, August 15th at 6 p.m. on Channel 14. Webcast at metro14live.saccounty.net. We now have the public opportunity to discuss matters of public interest within the district jurisdiction, including items on or not on the agenda. Madam Clerk, do we have any speakers tonight?
We do not have any.
Attendees, you now have the ability to unmute yourselves. If you would like to present anything to the board, now would be the time. Looks like no response.
The next item on the agenda is the consent items. Do you have any questions on the consent?
President Taylor. We have a consent item on the calendar this evening that needs to move to action. It is consent item number 7, the authorization to employ retired annuitant Lisa Barsdale. It was brought to staff's attention that there is a whereas in the resolution that requires this item to be an action item taken independently from consent. And after conference with General Counsel Lavra, he agreed that we could move this item to action item number 2 this evening, if that is your pleasure.
Sounds good to me. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
So having removed number 7 out of consent, I'll hear a motion, Megan.
So move. Second.
Madam Clerk, will you call the roll, please?
Director Gould.
Aye.
Orzali.
Aye.
Wood.
Aye.
Sheets.
Aye.
Jones.
Aye.
White.
Aye.
Clark.
Aye.
And Taylor.
Aye.
Motion passes.
Thank you. Our next item on the agenda is a presentation item, property tax revenue forecasting. Jeff Fry, our Chief Development Officer.
Thank you, President Sayers and meeting directors. I am going to tag team the presentation here with Chief Harms.
It's just bringing that up. I'll just speak just for a second here. With a lot of you all as board members and other folks, we've had just a lot of conversations about property tax. Obviously, with the raise in interest rates, the economy today, some questions on some of the past history. And past history is if you look at like 2007 and 2008 and what happened during that time and what are some of the, what I would say maybe similarities, but what is the differences today compared to what has kind of happened years ago. So Jeff, I think, started this and we were at about an hour and a half. And so we have taken it and pared it back down from there. kind of a very high overview of it and an opportunity for really everybody to get kind of the same picture of our funding. What does the forecast look like? And then how does that work as we move forward? So Jeff, take it away.
Thank you, sir. So with that, really, I titled the presentation Property Tax Forecasting, and as Chief said, we really want to focus on the real estate market conditions and the implication for our tax revenues. I broke it up the presentation into 4 pieces. The first thing I want to do is look at a very micro level of an assessment at the parcel level and talk about some key provisions that pertain to our property tax laws. And slowly move out. I want to look at neighborhoods and what are the implications for our property taxes related to neighborhoods. Move a little further out and look at real estate market conditions as they apply to regional and then national economic factors that would affect us. And then finally talk about the property tax revenue. So really the questions that I am trying to answer with the presentation is, now with a lot of talk about an economic recession, what effect do we expect to have on the real estate market? How will it affect Metro Fire? And will it be as bad as the Great Recession that is still in the back of all of our minds? So moving on to the first part, I just want to go through a quick refresher on some of the major components of our property tax system, starting with Proposition 13, passed by those voter initiative in 78. And it establishes a base year value. So as of a change of ownership event or new construction could be transferred to the sale, a base year value is established at fair market value. And then that is assessed, hits the tax roll at 1% of that value. So that is the dollars collected by the entire county related to a parcel. Commonly referred to as a base year value, that base year value can only be inflated no more than 2% a year. So that's a big part of the law that we talk a lot about. Proposition 8, if you think about Prop 13 establishing the ceiling of the real estate taxes you're going to pay in California, Proposition 8 establishes the floor. So it basically allows for a temporary reduction when market value falls below that property tax value. And I'll show you a graph here in a second. The third concept I want to introduce is reassessment. So, for example, when a piece of real estate sells, it triggers a new appraisable event. And the difference between the value on the roll and the new appraisal is what's called a supplemental assessment. And I'll use an example here to explain supplemental assessments. But the supplemental assessment is really important because the majority of our property tax liens come from those events. So I'll point that out a couple of times. So here's an example, just to give you an idea of how supplemental works. The example I provided here is a greenfield development, land developer has several hundred acres, sells it to a home builder. The value that happened is then subdivided among all of those parcels. And that establishes what I show here as the $97,000. So home builder secures the lot, builds a home, sells it to a family, and the family buys that property for $560,000. What's on the roll today is the $97,000. So at time of escrow, the new buyer is going to pay at escrow their share of that $97,000. The supplemental assessment that I just described is that $560,000. So the property owner is going to be sent a bill for the difference. And this, you can see how big those numbers can get when you're moving from raw land to construction. But anytime there's the property's been held for a long period of time, we have these really big supplemental assessments. So here's a graph that the assessor's office here in Sacramento created a number of years ago. Certainly it was around in my time when I worked there, and explains the whole situation pretty well. The first blue line represents the Prop 13 value. So as I said, Prop 13 establishes a ceiling. In this case, in year one, the owner purchased the property for $200,000. And then that value is factored up at 2% over 7 years. So that's that blue line you see there. That red line represents a market value. So in year one and year two, the property appreciates greatly. The homeowner is not paying property taxes based on that gain. Prop 13 applies. However, in year three, there's a dramatic decrease in property values. Prop 8 triggers. And now the property owner will be paying taxes based on the market value under the Prop 8 rules all the way till year 6. At that point in time, the value crosses the Prop 13 line again, Prop 13 is triggered. So again, for our property tax system, it greatly favors the homeowner, right? It sets a cap with the values, but can decrease almost unlimited. So while we're on this slide, I want to show you a couple of examples of supplemental assessments. Again, it really factors into some of the issues we're talking about today. First, let's look at the year three, where the factor base year value is $208,000. The market value is at $150,000. If that property were to sell for that $150,000, it would create a negative supplemental event. In effect, local government would be refunding property tax dollars to the new owner. And I think this is really important to talk about now because this is what we saw in 2007 to 2011. The reason why this is bad is because it drops that factor base year value down to a number, and now those 2% increases are established with that new base year value. Prop 8 in itself is not a terrible thing because we know at some point in time the market will recover and it will restore to those Prop 13 values. What really hurts local government is those negative supplemental assessments. Conversely, let's look at year 7 there, where we have $225,000 on the roll. The property is now worth $300,000. And kind of take where we are today. A lot of people have a lot of quote unquote tax equity in their homes right now. So even if we establish that today's value is $300,000, but it drops, say 10% and sells for $270,000 in a bid, you can still see it's going to produce a positive supplemental because the value on the roll is still only $225,000. So again, understanding the supplemental assessments and where we are as a market is very important. So now moving out, I want to talk a little bit about a neighborhood and market cycles that we see certain neighborhoods go through. I have 4 cycles or 4 phases there with a couple of attributes you can see. If you're out looking around. When I was at the assessor's office, we would use these understanding of neighborhoods and the markets to identify what stage each of these neighborhoods were in. And then we would trend sales in those neighborhoods to understand where those neighborhoods were going. Up, down, stagnant, stable, whatever it was. And it really gives insight into markets, especially neighborhoods. So with those definitions there, I'm going to move to the next slide here and show you, again, using our development project, 700 acres, split, going to build a couple of thousand homes. This is the path that those neighborhoods would go through. So the value on the roll would be relatively low because it's land only. As sales started to generate, it would force an appreciation in those new neighborhoods. And if you think about the fact that a builder is always trying to sell a house at a premium, so that sells the house selling at that premium, that then becomes a market comparable for other sales in the neighborhood. So you have this growth in value, but also in the number of parcels that are selling. So when buildable lots start to decrease over time, it's essentially built out. We hit that stability phase where property values really level out. And it'll stay there for a very long time until the properties become outdated or there's a lot of heavy maintenance needed in the neighborhood. Then we eventually go through that decline and then the renewal period. I point this out because this was my biggest takeaway when I was at the assessor's office. The growth of the neighborhoods that are experiencing growth and decline are particularly susceptible to market downturns. And they show up early, very early in the process. So I think that's a good lesson for us to be aware of and a place that we can look as we have these questions about markets. And learning that lesson when I was at the assessor's office and bring it to Metro Fire is kind of that situational awareness, where we can continue to look for those economic indicators as we move into uncertain market conditions. So this is brand new this year, and I think this is a great new tool for us at Metro Fire. We took all of our geospatial data and made it to first use. Since we are a fire department, we all understand engine first use. So we are going to apply that neighborhood format that I just told you about to first use. So I have 31 here as an example, which is Farrell's Village. And we pulled a lot of parcel and value data specifically related to that area for us to monitor. So a couple of things when I look at this data, what I'm looking for is parcel creations. Today, there's about 5,500 parcel creations. If we're seeing 300 to 400 to 500 parcels being created a year, we know we're in a growth phase. We know this is the place that we can look for some of those market conditions, see where everything is moving. And then the second place we'll look at is the taxable value. Are the real estate values going up organically just because our real estate is worth more? Or is that value that's increasing tied to new parcel creations, new homes, subdivided lots, those type of things? And I make that distinction because if you think about new homes being built, it requires larger population, more calls, we need more people, more stations, more apparatus. So that factors into our CIP plan. Mm-hmm. If it's just organic, there's no new parcels, and we're just getting a higher revenue because of those supplemental sales I was describing, that's money that goes to the general fund and will be spent as needed. So I'm really excited about this tool. It is very new. We just created it probably 6 or 7 weeks ago. I think it's going to be a big help moving forward. So moving on, we're going to look at market conditions related to the region and the feds. I just want to make a couple of the notes here. I've been doing this a long time, almost 20 years, real estate, most of it in the public sector, some in the private sector. I do not like speculating. I don't speculate. We like to look at data, and we like to know where it's going. I think doing this for a government allows us to do that, since we don't make money off speculating in the real estate market. We can sit and observe and watch for all these factors that I just described and see where the market's going and then tell you folks about it. A lot of the classes I've taken in this world will focus on anywhere from 3 to 25 factors to describe market conditions. For the purpose of this presentation, I'll keep it fairly simple. Just talk about 3 national trends and then 4 local trends. Starting with the national trends. I have 3 of the indicators: inflation, interest rates, and flow of funds, all seemingly interrelated. There are some slight nuances there, but for our purposes, it's easy to talk about them together. First, with inflation, we've all heard a lot about it in the news. Year over year, trending over 9%. That is a concern. Seems like they did have a slight reduction the last couple of weeks, but for the foreseeable future, we need to think about inflation and what it's going to do to us here and our property tax values. In and of itself, our Prop 13 base year values are based on inflation. So to that extent, some inflation is good. Now, ours for property tax purposes capped at 2%. But it's fair to say for the foreseeable future, we will be maximizing that 2% inflation related to our property tax base. There was also a lot of talk about wage inflation. Wage inflation for us is actually a good thing. It just takes a while for it to hit our bottom line. I'll give you the scenario is I negotiate a raise. I start collecting that raise. That is now money I can spend for a new home or housing and rent, which triggers sales or change of ownerships and new construction, which gets into the property tax base and then eventually comes the Metro Fire. That is a good thing. It just takes a lot of time. It can take 3 to 5 years for all of that to play out. So we as a property tax system lag the markets as far as inflation goes, but we will see a benefit from that down the road. I'll talk about interest rates and flow of funds together. Banks control lending rates, but are heavily influenced by monetary policy. We have seen the interest rates tick above 5%. It feels uncomfortable because we've been for 10 years at historical low interest rates. But if we keep perspective here, 5% is still pretty low historically. I remember in the early to mid 2000s, even during the last boom, interest rates kind of hovered in that 4 to 6 to 4 to 8 range. So that's kind of where we are today. Then finally, talk about flow of funds, which is monetary policy. We all know after the Great Recession, the Fed used monetary policy to free money up to re-stimulate the economy. We took the next step during COVID, where the Congress and the state took a lot of measures to dump a lot of money into the economy, and money was very cheap. And that essentially is what created the inflationary time we find ourselves in now. And now I think the Fed is doing a good job of trying to peel that back with increasing interest rates to slow that down. So that is a look at the national factors. Let's take a real quick look at the 4 local conditions. Job growth is always interesting, an interesting topic right now. Unemployment numbers are ticking up as of the last couple of weeks, but so are vacant positions. So what I'm hearing a lot about is some discussion that there may be a downturn or recession related to white collar jobs, specifically tech industries and venture capitalism. That is important to us because of our proximity to the area and our connection of what they call a mega region here. But blue collar jobs are up. So construction jobs are up, manufacturing jobs are up with reshoring. So a little bit of mixed news there. In and out migration. I was explaining this to Chief the other day. I think we may or may not be familiar with the idea of Bay Area flight, but very simply, here's how it works. There's global demand for Bay Area real estate. We have a lot of money come into the area. It forces workers out. They have to move basically a city out. You talk about 30-mile increments. And so they become commuters and then super commuters as they move away from the Bay Area. Eventually, Bay Area real estate slumps, and those people that were forced out to communities outside of the Bay Area return when they can afford to do so. We've seen this trend happen 4 times that I'm aware of since the mid-'80s. And, you know, what I think is interesting is what happened during COVID and work from home policies. Right. So everybody was thoroughly convinced that they're going to be able to work from home forever and move to Sacramento because real estate's cheap and they can have a great life here in the suburbs. We're starting to hear some rumblings in the tech sector that they may be forced to return to work. So that in itself would trigger the Bay Area flight in reverse, right? So we should be aware of the Bay Area folks driving up prices in Sacramento, but also as they leave, we are prone to downturns there. And then I'll just combine path of progress and new construction. And really, that's a big part of my job here and what I do for Metro Fire, well connected to the planning departments and the development community. We thoroughly understand the path of progress, where development and redevelopment is occurring, and we understand the new construction associated with that. So again, with the new development of us to be able to look at first dues in that way and monitor growth in the first due area, I feel like we just have a really good handle on those 2 local factors. So in summary, if you kind of take each of those elements on their own, mixed reviews, depending if you're an optimist or a pessimist, you can grab them in those situations differently. If you put them together, I think it tells a different story. And what I think it tells is after the Great Recession, Fed uses monetary policy to restart the economy, did it again in the COVID factors and in COVID, and it worked, right? But now we have a real estate market that's way too hot. And so now folks are taking corrective action to make sure that we have a softer landing and don't need to enter into a crash like we're all afraid of. And then, so with that scenario, if we continue to watch the economic conditions in the first news, especially in the growth areas, we're going to have a very early indicator if there's something to worry about. And I will give you an example here. Down in Vineyard in 2003, I was appraising new construction, residential house. I think it sold for $300,000. 90 days later, it sold for $270,000, 10% loss in 90 days. Reason for concern, it raised a red flag for me, and I would start asking a lot of questions, right? That event happened in August of 2005. Now, we largely attribute the downturn to 2008. So we had 2.5-year notice that something had changed. And we knew what was going on at the assessor's office and began to talk about it. So since we have all these little pieces that we can grab onto and watch, I think we have a really good understanding of the market conditions we find ourselves in. So with that, our property tax consultant has 5-year projections for this next fiscal year, originally projected at 6.68%. Actual came in at 8%, which is the too hot part that I just told you about. However, for the next 4 fiscal years, the projections are around 4.5%. Now, remember what I just told you, 2% of that is based on escalation by inflation. So we're only in our projections, only looking for the supplemental events that I was describing early. We only expect for that to account for about 2.5% of our increase, which is fairly conservative. I will tell you that's a historical average. We may see some profit reductions in the next year or two, not to be concerned because the sales of the parcels with those large tax equity bases will certainly offset, I expect to offset any of those profit reductions. So I moved through that and it really was, Chief Farm said it was an hour-and-a-half presentation, it probably was. So I did my best to reduce that down, but happy to take any questions or comments.
Sure. Thank you for this. It's a great economics 101 again, and you did a fabulous job of filling the town for guys. So I appreciate that. I'm really intrigued with this idea that you've now started to integrate our geomapping and those kind of behaviors. So you set it up in a way where there can be early alerts to the behavior that you described at the end, where you knew 2.5 years in advance of things that eventually we attribute to 2008. We now have that capability in-house is basically what you're saying. So I think that's a really important thing to let the community know is that we've taken it to a point where instead of being reactionary, we can now be preventative of these kinds of things well in advance so that the quality of our service to the community maintains itself. So kudos to you and your shop for doing those kind of things and for us now having that. The other question I have is, we have a economics consultant, a guy who sits at a crystal ball and gives us those numbers in the last slide. My experience has been, it takes a couple of those guys that aren't brothers to get in the room and kind of hash it out instead of one guy. So do we ever take somebody's 4.55 or whatever and validate it with someone else that's not in the same business or same building so that we have a different perspective, maybe somebody that's not as aggressive?
Yeah, I will first tell you, she's very conservative, first of all, even a little more conservative than I would be. But we certainly do get the raw data from the assessor's office directly.
Right.
And then, so we then work with the property tax consultant to adjust the numbers based on what we know of local market conditions, and then kind of come up with what you saw today.
So we have one consultant.
Yeah.
And I guess my question is so much of it is projections and crystal ball and stuff is it for our benefit? Now that we have the red flag data that you're generating, would it be to our benefit to have another set of eyes on that? Because so much of what we do in building budgets and thinking about future plans revolve around some of these forecastings, and I just wonder your level of comfort with one guy painting the picture.
You know how that plays out, honestly, is I'm on the phone with my counterparts with the cities and counties all the time. And in fact, Amanda and I just had a conversation last week about these numbers.
Yeah, we kind of like, okay,
So
so
I
you
think
answered the
that
question.
might be
It
the
is,
challenge.
you aren't just taking that 4 point whatever and going, okay, great. We start running a bunch of plans. It's, you're having constant conversation. So if someone says, I don't know where you get to 4.5, we got 2.5, and you can start. So you are basically checking against that guy's or that consultant's work. Thank you.
Any other questions? Go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Fry. Well done. Appreciate that. On one of the earlier charts, I have two questions, and if it's too detailed to answer now, we can always do it offline or at the finance committee or something. What about the actuals for the plus or minus on the supplements actually happening in the districts? You said in the first dues, that's the different first due for engine trucks, right? That was for example, I'm curious what the actuals are for the plus and minus for our area. I'm sure you must have that data.
We do in aggregate. So we have those numbers for the district as a whole. I believe one of the aspects of forgive me, the report that you get from the consultants, I think they may even have it by jurisdiction, meaning our county.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know that we have that data at the first due.
Okay. Let me back out of the first due then. I was just concerned about actuals because we were talking about the general stuff and very well done in terms of the overview. So I'm curious about how, when do we will have to get into our actuals at some point.
Yes.
Okay.
And that typically happens in August or early September after the roll is closed.
Right. Thank you. Well, then I'll look forward to more discussion on that one. And then how do we account, where do resales come in on that chart?
As a reassessment and a supplemental.
So that would be captured in the plus under supplements.
Yes.
All right.
So the supplemental values are a combination of new construction
Mm-hmm.
and resales.
Okay.
So while the property tax consulting is talking to our finance department, I'm quickly turning to that page to see where things are at.
Right. No, that's exactly what I understand. How much is from new construction? Could you talk about projections and such? And then how much would just be the selling and we get a big bump?
So that is a detail in the report that we get, specifically on cost of development, which allows us to separate.
Okay, very. And then could you, well, maybe not right at this moment, send us a few of those, the red flags that we might be looking for in the next few months?
As far as indicators for downturns?
Or upturns? Yeah, you said the red flags and such. And in 05, was that because of countrywide? Do you think?
It was because of the predatory lending practices.
Oh, yes. Illusion. All right. Thank you, Mr. Fry. I really appreciate the information.
Any other questions? Thank you, Mr. Fry, for that great. Thank you. Moving on to action items. The first one is A or FF service agreement with Metropolitan LLC.
Okay, relatively simple request here, but the details are important. We're asking the board to approve or authorize the chief to execute an agreement between Metro Fire and the Methodist Business Park folks for the aircraft rescue firefighting at McClellan. A little bit of background, this is an agreement that's been in place for the better part of 20 years. For many, many years, County of Sacramento owned and operated McClellan. They anticipated in our last agreement handing the entire airport over to the business park owners. That happened in 2017. You're all aware that the Coast Guard operates at McClellan, and we provide or subcontract for those park services to the operator of the airport, which is now the business park. So the Coast Guard decided, because of their procurement laws, we couldn't extend the agreement, which is supposed to be extended through December of this year, that they needed to go back through the RFP process and have everything on the up and up. So partnering with the McClellan folks, we are quickly scrambling and putting together a proposal and a response. We have submitted our costs to the partners to submit. They will be the prime contractor. We will be a subcontractor. They intend to submit their response to the RFP next week, I believe. We expect to get a response back from the Coast Guard the last week in August. Here's the kicker. They want to start the brand new service as of September 1. So administratively, we have zero time to figure all this out and get our ducks in a row. So we're actually asking the board tonight to approve the agreement between us and the business partners, so that agreement is in place, so that if we get the award, we know how it's going to operate and how we're going to recover our costs to provide that service. So I hope that makes sense, but that's the agreement we have.
Unless there's any other comments or questions. I'd like to make a motion that we adopt a resolution authorizing the fire chief or his designee to execute an agreement for McClellan Airport Aircraft Rescue and Firefighting Services.
I'll second.
Go ahead, Madam Clerk, will you vote and call the roll, please?
Director Gould,
Aye.
Valley,
Aye.
Wood,
Aye.
Sheets,
Aye.
Jones,
Aye.
White.
Aye.
Clark.
Aye.
And Sailor.
Aye.
Motion passes.
Thank you. The next item on the agenda is authorization to employ retired annuitant Lisa Barstow, Deputy Chief Leiter.
Sailors, directors, fire chief farms, Tyler Wagon, and deputy chief support services. Before you this evening is an authorization of requesting us to hire back Chief Barstow as a retired annuitant. As you know, Chief Barstow retired here on July 1st after 30 years of dedication and service. And Assistant Chief Law, who was our EMS chief, was reassigned as our fire marshal on June 13th, allowing a pretty short window between the 13th and the July 1st to do a complete transition. So this coupled with a pre-scheduled vacation as well as a deputy fire marshal resignation, there just was not adequate time to complete the fire marshal transitional plan. Due to stipulations within CalPERS rules, we were unable to hire back without board approval through a resolution within that 160-day window. So that is what our request is this evening. Typically, I certainly wouldn't go through the work requesting 80 hours of a retired annuitant in the form of a board resolution if I didn't believe the importance of it. So with that, it is our recommendation that you adopt this resolution to authorize this exemption to the 180-day waiting period as defined within the CalPERS.
Do you have any questions?
No.
You know, first, I make the motion.
Second.
Madam Clerk, will you call the roll, please?
Director Gould,
Aye.
Valley. I saw you mouth aye. I'll take that. Wood,
Aye.
Sheets,
Aye.
Jones,
Aye.
White,
Aye.
Clark.
Aye.
And Sailor.
Aye.
Motion passes.
Thank you. Next up on the action item is our ratification of the resolution to extend teleconference of board meetings. As COVID trends remain steady and a 7-day average of 383 new cases in Sacramento County as of August 9th, the option to participate in meetings virtually is still necessary for those who have tested positive, have been exposed, who show symptoms but have yet to receive positive results, or those who care for high-risk loved ones. Everyone's health and keeping exposure to a minimum is still the goal we are all faced with today. So we shall once again continue to have a hybrid meeting. Do I have any questions? Or shall we entertain a motion in a second?
Motion to ratify.
Second.
Will you call the roll, please?
Director Gold, or Sally.
So thumb up there.
Aye.
Director Wood,
Aye.
Sheets,
Aye.
Jones,
Aye.
White.
Aye.
Clark.
Aye.
And Sailors. Motion passes.
Thank you. The next up is an industrial disability retirement, which we shall discuss in closed session and then report out later. Next up is report. President's report, I have none tonight. Fire chief's report.
Good evening, directors. I have just a couple of things. The first one is in just a couple weeks ago, the service delivery team's work and the grant and a number of things all came together as Medic 59 went in service, Squad 24 went in service. The fourth position on engine companies also went out there. If you back up and being able to look at the plan, it was probably about 24 months of everything from being able to get the things laid out for the safer grant, look at the plan and putting this together. The service delivery team, Michael Jones here, along with John Rudnicki, looked across the district and what are our needs and being able to prioritize those and put that together for it to happen. Very proud of all three of the deputies, Tyler, Adam, and Ty, to be able to put everything that was in place to be able to add the units, dispatch, beds in fire stations, purchase pickup trucks, everything that we need to do it. I know for me personally, and I listen to the radio way too much, but one of the things that used to happen out at Station 59 was every time they had a call, Station 58 had to move up to be able to cover. And then when the transport happened, it was just the out of service time. And here at 59, no on calls and not hearing the move ups that had to happen in the past, it's pretty incredible. Squad 24 is looking at least during the daytime, the amount of calls that it's at least being dispatched on. I think for us now, one of our next things is to be able to look at it and say, this was the expectation that we had on it, and here is the impact, and here's what we need to be able to do in the future as we look at that call line. So not only those folks that are here tonight, but everybody that was a part of that, thank you for going through really a lot of work over the last 24 months to get that done. So perfect on that. We had just a few things with the deputies and with Dave on the final budget. And so we'll bring that to the budget committee next meeting and then to the board, the first meeting in September. The SRP 22-2 graduated. Have 10 recruits in there. They're out doing their ride along right now. 5 paramedics, 5 EMTs. I believe 4 out of the 5 EMTs have completed their paramedic and need some type of internship to be able to be certified. So great stuff on there too. And the last thing is tomorrow at 11 in downtown Sacramento is the CEO SOAP event for ALS. As you all know, my good friend and dear friend, colleague Matt Kelly was unfortunately diagnosed with ALS. I still talk with Matt quite a bit and asked me to be involved. And so thanks for the donations from a lot of you on that. And I guess tomorrow at 11, I'll be soaked for ALS. That ends my report unless you have any questions.
Any questions? No. Thank you, Chief. Next up is Deputy Chief Mitchell with the operations report.
President Saylor, good evening, everybody. Thanks for the report out tonight from operations. Since our last meeting, we've run a total of 3,840 calls, about 274 calls a day. We're being busy out there. That's 4.4% EMS related, about 153 fire incidents since that time. So it's been very busy. A couple of incidents to highlight. The first one I'd like to talk about is a upcoming presentation by our CQI Battalion Chief. There's all this that we'll be presenting along with staff from Kaiser South about a stroke at a stroke care committee. This incident occurred back on February 22nd of this year. There was a patient, it was a 43-year-old female who was on the phone with her brother. Her brother recognized that she was exhibiting symptoms he wouldn't expect to hear from his sister, asked her to pull over and use the find my iPhone app to figure out where she was at. He called 911 and activated the system. What happened after that was fire dispatch started taking the call, got the information in very quickly, and the outcome was a very positive one. And one of the highlights would be the continuum of care that occurred between dispatch, our EMS response, and the hospital. Again, Kaiser was very happy with the care that we provided, and an early stroke activation resulted in very quick treatment for that individual. So great job there. It was 32 minutes from the time of the call received that dispatch to the time that that patient was at the back door of the hospital and getting ready to get into the stroke protocol. We have a 4-minute response and just a 6-minute scene time. Turn around, transport code 3. So tonight, as we look back, it was a while ago. Sometimes these things take a while to come together. I'd like to recognize our crew that was involved in that incident. Truck 50, Medic 50 on B shift, Captain Ryan and Freddie, Engineer Zumwalt, Firefighter Paramedic Koss, Firefighter Paramedic and now Engineer Parsa. Medic 50, Firefighter Galvesdorfer, and Firefighter Getru was the paramedic. They would be recognized more moving forward through the EMS division. Some in-person recognition, but they just found out that listening tonight about that incident that occurred, positive outcome. So I thought that was a really good one to highlight, to talk about how much we do out there with EMS. This was a really positive. A couple other incidents that have occurred on Friday, August 5th. We had an auto wrecking yard fire up in Battalion 5 on West 6th Street. Some helicopter recovering that. Very, very high BTUs fire going on. Involved a number of companies from us as well as law enforcement, Sacramento County OES, SMUD. The incident was broken up into 3 divisions for brand control. Also related to the incident, 5 of their members responded to support our rehab, and as well the crew stayed on scene overnight, rotating for the incident during lunch. And the second one, we had an apartment fire early morning hours on Sunday, August 7th on Data Drive. We did go to a second alarm, and total of 8 units out of the 20 unit building were impacted by fire, smoke, and water damage. Fortunately, SMUD and PG&E were able to restore the utilities to 12 of the units that were not involved in the fire and allowed the residents to remain. We did experience one firefighter with a burn injury from that incident. Was treated and assessing excellent care. Some thermal burns, radiant heat. We had some molten metal from one of the air conditioning units that was over the top of the fire. Had a lot of fire there. Back to work. It's the end of the operations report.
Chief, could you tell me again how many fires we responded to? So I noticed our EMS response percentage is dropping and our fire percentage is going up. Can you tell me how many there were?
Yeah, over this time period, 133 fire incidents.
Do we know how many of those are being caused or are in the areas of our homeless encampments?
We now have data that we're collecting. I don't have it in front of me here, but yes, we do have a system in place now where we have changed our first reporting structure that allows us to gather when those events do occur around those unhoused communities. Start looking at some of that and providing.
Yeah, I think we need to start sharing that, breaking out that fire response piece so that the community is aware of the cost to our system. Because as you well know, when we take a piece of apparatus down to put out a dumpster fire or whatever the case may be, it takes a piece of apparatus out for that stroke patient that you just talked about. So I think it's important that not only us here at this dais, but our other community elected officials understand that this issue has a significant cost to our service and to our agency because we're the ones that get toned out all the time for these things. And so I'm grateful you're counting it because I've noticed we've gone from 14 fires to now hundreds of fires in a month. And I think it's important that the citizens start to understand that. And it also, I think, reinforces a decision made 2 decades ago with, when we made the decision that there was going to be a huge threat along the American River Parkway because of some of this. And we put in play these little things that fly around in the water. And to me, this is another example of what are we going to do 10 years from now with this problem or this challenge what do you call them, the unhomed? The unhoused, I'm sorry, I call them homeless, that's my bad. But, I think that issue needs to be addressed by all of us in this community because it's having a big impact on the safety of our firefighters.
Absolutely. As that data gets better, we'll reflect that. We're also doing.
Excellent, thank you so much.
Excellent. Next up, we have firefighters local 522.
Board, Chief Farms, if we hear everybody to in and Nicholas Valley, right, my face here. It's me again. That is in Ottawa, Canada. Yeah, I have that convention. It's best. First and foremost, I've been told that as of tomorrow, we want to congratulate Engineer Kevin Hicks on 18.5 years of retired. I personally, very early in my career, got to spend a lot of very fun meals at the table with Kevin. And I personally will miss him a lot. Public will lose a very good servant in him. So we wish him the best. He's been very busy. Recently, we had a staffing committee meeting, and the labor and management collaboration there is continuing to work very well. That's something that affects us almost. Obviously, it's been a challenge with our staffing levels, and continue to be. Jenkins is in the room. He's the labor, he's the management arm of that committee. It's great to work with. That's one of the harder things that we are challenged with right now is staffing and amount of overtime and mandatories and all of those things. And I feel like every time we meet, we make a little incremental progress. I feel like the membership is been doing that. That process. The next thing we had was we were able to have some new representation in our marshal process yesterday. We had an Indian got to sit in on that whole process to make sure that goes appropriately, and that way you guys don't have to deal with it. We also had labor has put together a committee to meet on what the promotional process looks like, what triggers the promotional test, how we can continue to staff those positions in a timely manner. And that way we're not having to worry about more brownouts or those types of things. Staffing. That was a long meeting, and I really our negotiations team met today to continue to move that ball forward as effectively as possible. I know the last time I was here, we had this same thing today. Came together with our group to just make sure that we come into the meeting prepared to make progress and not to really just spin our wheels wasted. I am fortunate to be on the service delivery team, and so every time I come up here, I get to talk about that. The exciting thing is 1 week ago today, we rolled those positions out, and I've been able to speak to many of the members involved with those units. I asked somebody to run me a simple in-person report on a squad unit activity. Obviously, like the fire chief said, Medic 59 is keeping units in service for that community. Director White gave me a phone call. I know that community is very excited about that. It's been nice to have the Engine 59 stay in service for more hours of the day. Coverage there. The backup seats on the engines. I know Engine 61 particularly has been several fire incidents and one large vehicle accident with a backup firefighter. I've been told that that seat has helped a ton in mitigating some exposure issues. On the vehicle accident, had several patients they were able to divide and conquer, start assessment and treatment much quicker than just 3. So that's been huge. And the squad at 24, again, I had a simple in-person report ran for the first week. They ran 58 calls in 7 days, which averages out to a little over 8 per day. So that's 8 calls that either engine 24, 23, 42, 103, or 108, or even further out engines aren't going to have to respond into 24s. And then roughly, if you extrapolate that out, it's about 3,000 calls a year.
that's a huge chunk for that area. Keeping those higher duty calls or keeping those engines and the other first responders available for those higher duty calls. Just a huge. So we really are excited about that, excited to see how that continues to function. They got to go to a fire on their first day as well. They were attached and utilized for fire attack, and I was told that was a very happy. So I'm excited about that. I'm excited about the continuation of that group as we continue to look at what is service delivery in this district look like. A year from now, 6 months from now, 5 years from now. So if you have any questions, I don't. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Next up, we have the committee and delegate reports. The executive committee met tonight. There was no reportable action taken. Our next meeting is adjourned. Communication Center JPA, DC Wayne.
President Taylor's the JPA board not met since our last meeting. No report.
Thank you. Finance and Audit Committee, Director Rosales.
Let me get,
Well, we can hear you now.
oh, can you hear me now? Great. Yeah, the Finance Committee meets next, at the next meeting on the 28th, 25th, excuse me. And that's my report.
Thank you very much. Policy Committee, Director Gould.
No report.
Thank you very much. We now have board members' questions and comments, and we will start with Director Jones.
Thank you, Madam President. The only thing I would like to say tonight is to extend a thank you and acknowledgement to senior staff and senior administrative officials here at Metro Fire. Over the last several weeks, I've had different follow-up questions, areas of interest, and the staff, all the staff members have always been very, very responsive and informative, and I very much appreciate that open dialogue. Thank you.
Thank you. Jennifer Sheets.
I have no comments tonight.
Thank you. Director Wood.
No comment. Thank you.
Thank you. Director Rosales.
I just very briefly like to thank Jeff for all the work that he and his team put in to that report. It is critically important to the future of Metro Fire. And so thank you very much.
Director Gould.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just really quickly, Jeff, thank you very much for your report. It was short, succinct, and super valuable. And I think it's really important that we take seriously the projections that you're collecting so that we can make good economic decisions, so we don't find ourselves in some of the historic, situations that we've been in where we put a lot of stress on our firefighter family to keep us whole. So I appreciate that. I appreciate your having that attention to those details. The other thing is I had an interesting phone call from an individual who went through our interview hiring process and was not successful. And he was not throwing any dispersions on the process, but there was a question that was brought up. When was the last time that we took a look at the scientific data that supports some of the steps that an individual has to go through in order to be considered a successful candidate? We do certain things as part of the interview process that may no longer be supported by the scientific evidence. And so I think we need to look at that. And I heard a little bit of conversation about recruitment and those kind of things. Well, if in fact some of the things that we do are not up to speed in the 21st century, I think it's important that we step back and I see these guys, and I know we've got hundreds of years of experience in there, but just because we do it doesn't mean it's right or it's maybe the science doesn't support it anymore. So I would say we want to take some of those things that are near and dear to our hearts that everybody had to go through when they were 4 feet tall. And maybe say, maybe that's not the best thing that we should be doing anymore in the 21st century. So that's all I need to say in that regard, but I hope we could go back through every one of those steps and say, is this something that current HR and current science says is a good indicator of success and honesty, integrity, yada, 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 right? So thank you very much, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Director Gould. Director White.
Report tonight.
Thank you, Director Clark.
No comment. Randy's got his hand back up. He's getting all text sent.
Do you have another comment to make tonight?
Just one comment. I wanted to commend Grant for that observation. As far back as Chief Wells, he and I had long conversations about reviewing our processes to reflect what social science now tells us is a more efficient and effective way for interviewing. So I appreciated it being brought up. Thank you.
Thank you, Director Rosales.
Let's see if you can take his hand down.
No comment either. So we shall.
Might launch a rocket or something.
Closed session. Take care and stay safe out there.
Recording stopped.
And is John Lover going to report out?
Yes, President Sailors, I'll report out. Apologize that my video feed isn't coming through. I don't know what, it happened earlier today too when I updated my apps on the Zoom program, I guess. So I want to apologize for that. In any case, the board met in closed session with respect to the industrial disability retirement matter pertaining to employee Kevin R. Henson. The board took no action on that item. Instead, that matter will be taken up now in open session. The board also met in closed session to discuss issues related to the fire chief selection process. No reportable action was taken. Thank you.
Thank you. So we will now do our vote. The action item number 4, industrial disability retirement for Kevin R. Henson. I'll entertain a motion in a second on that item.
So move.
Second.
Madam Clerk, will you call the roll, please?
Director Gould,
Aye.
Orzali,
Aye.
Wood,
Aye.
Sheets. Aye. Jones. White.
Aye.
Clark.
Aye.
And Sailors.
Aye.
Motion passes.
Thank you very much. I do declare that this meeting is adjourned.